Backup and disaster recovery is relative at all levels to everybody in this room. I guarantee it. Business continuity is critical to you no matter what you do. If you don't believe me, give me your cell phone and I will prove it. Anybody want to give me their cell phone and I'm going to go ahead and prove the value of business continuity or communication and access? You'll be freaking out if I do something with that phone. So it's relative to all of us. We have some objectives to cover. We want to talk about identifying and quantifying risk. Who likes to talk about life insurance? Okay. Anybody tested their life insurance? You can do it once. Okay, we're going to talk about quantifying risk. You need to do that if you're in a business that deals with IT, and if you're in a business, you deal with IT. Prioritizing business continuity, understanding where it sits within the priorities of a business. The evolution of backup and technology, backup and recovery technology. Where is it? Where did it come from? Where might it be going? Yes, I'm from StorageCraft, and we'll talk a little bit about that. This is not about StorageCraft. This is about business continuity and the technologies that are available to deliver it, just short of high availability, and we'll go into that conversation.
And one thing I want to point out, because this is, notice that these two are not talking about technology. When you start talking about business continuity, disaster recovery, there's a lot, especially in small and medium organizations, there's this tendency to throw it over to IT. It's a question about backups. And absolutely, that's a big component about it. But just as importantly, it's a question about business and organization and what that company or organization does for a living.
And then lastly, we'll demonstrate how to build a quick recovery solution. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to try not to use the term backup too often because really this focus is on recovery. Backup is just a component to get to recovery. There are many different ways. All right, the Founding Fathers slide. Every vendor has one of these if you've been to a vendor presentation. Our forefathers came over on the Mayflower, settled in Salt Lake City, Utah, apparently. Simplex-IT works with us. They're one of our partners that brings our technology to market. So you have to know who StorageCraft is. We're a software company. We write really good software. You may have used it before. Anybody use Ghost? You're familiar with our technology. Anybody use the old VMware converter back when it first came out? You're familiar with our technology. Basically, we write software that creates backup to recovery solutions. That's why we've been picked. We're about 160 employees. We back up millions of servers around the world. About 40% of our market is the United States, so we're not just a little company down the street. I came out of Charlotte, so you know my background because it's going to be important in a minute. I'm a recovering MSP/VAR, and if you know what that means, that's what he does for a living. Okay.
I'm not recovering.
I had one of those entrepreneurial seizures. Actually, I had several of them. I had a .com back in the early days, and then I started an IT company down in Charlotte, converted it to a managed services practice, and ultimately was able to step out of the company and sell it. In that process, I learned a lot of mistakes, or from a lot of mistakes. One of the biggest ones I learned happened in about 2006, where I went to a staffing company. I didn't. One of my technicians was there. And he was on the phone with a certain company out of Austin that starts as 4 letters. Their support was out of India. I won't mention their name. But he's working with this hardware company to try to fix this server. And he says, the support technician says, do this, do this, do this. No, wait, stop. My technician had already committed those changes. Basically, if you know what a RAID is, well, it wasn't there anymore. A lot of irrelevant data on a few drives that was useless unless it goes to a recovery service. So we went to the process of recovering that customer from, I hate to use the word tape. Turns out the first tape was in a locked mode, meaning it was an archive tape, and the second one, and then the sequel hadn't run that. Anyway, long story short, we lost 2 weeks worth of data. Never happened in my life before. It wasn't a good situation. It wasn't where I wanted to be. 2 weeks worth of recoverable data was lost. Recoverable meaning that employees were now rekeying data, but what wasn't recoverable was the time that was lost to get that data back, and more importantly, the about 1,200 employees that work for Lowe's, if you're familiar with Lowe's Home Improvement, they're based out of Charlotte where I'm from. Well, those seasonal employees didn't get their paychecks for about a week and a half. So people that needed their money, I'm sitting there, I was a miserable feeling for me. That and the fact I figured I was probably going to be sued out of business at that point, not enough liability insurance to cover it. Fortunately, they understood it wasn't necessarily my fault. Well, it was because my technician did something he didn't know how to absolutely undo, but it worked out well. I learned a lesson that backup and disaster recovery is an important conversation to have. Every organization needs to know what their recovery plan is, period. So I'm glad you guys are here for that.
Here's the thing, and the only reason I bring up this slide, and don't worry about it too much, is I'm basically talking about a fictional company that has business processes. And there are employees involved with the business processes that cost money because you're paying them. If you figured out a way not to pay employees, tell me. Never mind. But they have fixed costs. And in a lot of cases, you have fixed costs as far as we've divided into manufacturing and sales and everybody else. You know, we're generating the revenue, we're consuming the costs, and then we've got all of the other operational costs there. Now, the issue is what is the cost of unprotected processing, unprotected data, where you don't quite know exactly what is going to happen if you lose productivity, because it's not going to happen when you want it to. It's going to happen when you're not ready for it. So this, we're just simply talking about their sales folks. They cost this much. They generate X number of orders a day or X number of dollars. Same thing on the shop floor. So we've got some just raw numbers, okay? And then the next question is, if we take a look at the manufacturing side, what happens if the server that's helping the people on the shop floor, what happens if they go offline for an hour, for a day, for a week? If you're the IT person, you can't answer that question. The shop floor manager should be able to, because are there hard copies of the orders? It's Ask American Airlines, yeah. Okay? Someone in charge of the business process should know. Will sales suffer? If your customers are expecting just-in-time processing and you're down for these periods of time, you can't provide that. Are your customers going to suffer? And if so, will they take their business elsewhere? You know, how will they react? What's the cost if the data is lost for? You know, when he was talking about the previous situation, they could re-enter the data. What if you're paperless? If you're paperless, then having that data protected is that much more important. And then we have more of the internal process. These aren't as much customer-facing, because this is stuff that HR uses, the accounting folks. Okay, payables and receivables might get a little upset, but it's the same questions. And so my point and comment to this is that this is a dialogue that you have to have within your organization. And you have to have with people who can assign numbers and assign values. Because one of the challenges is when someone does look for business continuity, disaster recovery, we'll get into the differences between those solutions, and someone says, well, that's too much money, what's the alternative? What's the alternative in terms of the cost?
Everybody write this down on a piece of paper. I'm going to teach you something. RTO. Let's see some. You know, I got the privilege of listening to somebody named Zig Ziglar, famous sales coach. He said to us, everybody write this down. Things that are easy to do or easy not to do. And he said, how many wrote that down? Like 3 of us out of 1,000 raised our hand. Little lesson. It's easy to not to do. So RTO. What does that stand for? Anybody want to take a guess? Recovery time objective. What does that mean? How long can your business afford to be without access to your critical IT services? No, that's a question. How long can your business afford to be without access to your critical IT services? Go ahead and write that number down next to RTO. You may not know this. Just make one up. You can do it in minutes, hours, or days. When I say how long before it really starts to hurt? Before people start going somewhere else, before there's a tangible cost. Ideally, you don't want any downtime, but that may not be reality. You may have to suffer downtime. What would be the next things that's associated with downtime? Cost. What's the cost of being down? Now, if you're going to go, and this is kind of going back to his prior slide, and for you, those of you that are learning how to measure your cost of recovery and exposure, this is a lesson for you to take back and probably work through several times. You can do it once for each server or service or infrastructure that you're dealing with. But what is the cost of your lost productivity? And that cost theoretically would go up exponentially per minute, day, hour, depending on what business model you're in. If you're a municipality or school, you may not measure things that way, but there's still a tangible cost. I asked a director of an IT director for a charter school down where I live what the cost of downtime was for him after X, Y, Z, and he finally goes, my job. So there's a cost. Second thing is RPO, recovery point objective. If you walk out of here knowing 2 things, these are the 2 things you need to take back and know. Every organization should know these things. How long can I afford to be without access for my data? What will it cost me? Recovery time objective. How much data can I afford to lose? This is what is this? Anybody? Ooh, somebody used the four-letter word. It's a tape drive. I usually carry a Trevan, but this is a little bigger. It does have a little lock on it, which got me in trouble that one time. So typically you run these how often? Anybody running tape? Well, if you were running, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Come down to the Carolinas. We're still fighting the Civil War down there. Okay. Daily. So your recovery point objective, if it's 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and your server goes down, how much data are you going to lose? At least a day. And in my case, a week, because it was locked and the SQL database wasn't backing up. Your recovery point objective is how much data are you going to lose between this backup and the last backup, the one you have to recover from versus what point in time it is now. So measure that recovery point objective. If you're backing up hourly, daily, weekly, that's your recovery point objective. Measure it. Now, do you feel like you have adequate plans to meet this? All right, trivia question. How do most companies test their recovery plan? When you're in trouble? I hear that one a lot. When they need it. There's a better answer, another one. It is a trick question. How do most companies test their recovery plan? They don't. 56% of organizations in the United States, according to Gartner Group, do not have a documented disaster recovery plan. And you guys probably know that because you're sitting there thinking, have I really documented exactly what it would take to get back up? Do you trust you have the objectives? When's the last time you tested it? Most organizations don't. Why don't most organizations test their recovery plan? Cost, time. Anybody have, Danny, you got an iPhone? An Android? Can I see it for a second? When's the last time you backed it up?
Some files on the computer.
Some of it? So is it important to you? Can I go ahead and wipe it? No, really, I'm going to wipe the whole thing. Is that okay?
All my contacts are on the Google.
Okay, so you've done some precautions, but if I do, you have a recovery time objective of how long it takes you to get from here to the AT&T store, if it's completely gone, or how long it takes you to get back to your computer. Now, the reason we're not going to test it is because we don't know for sure. Now, if I could take out another phone and go ahead and show you, here is exactly your phone recovered, and do it in a matter of minutes, would you feel a little bit more comfortable of me doing it on yours, knowing that I could fully recover it? Ideally, you might. The problem is, who has an extra set of servers laying around? Who wants to this Friday, besides you guys, who wants to this Friday go ahead and walk up to their servers and let's get a really big magnet, just for fun, and wipe all the drives the hard way? And just delete everything on there. In fact, let's just pull those out and put the hardware back in. And let's see if we can recover our servers. Who wants to do that?
Come on.
It's depends on the weather, right?
What's wrong with America?
So the reason most companies haven't tested their recovery plan is they can't. Why haven't they? Because they work with me. I'm going to try to keep you from going to sleep. The caffeine's getting lower, the carbs are going up, because they can't. They don't have a second set of servers laying around with nothing else to do besides disrupt every user in the organization and bring up a test recovery. So they recover a file. Oh, look, we can recover a file. Okay, great. Here's your phone back. Go. Make a call. Check your email. This is what it's like to get your data back. You just get back gobbledygook. You got to have something to run it on. And does this concern you? Obviously, you wouldn't be here learning about this topic if it didn't. So what is a disaster? Here comes Mark doing his doom, the end is near, carrying my sign around. A disaster, well, out here, you guys do have those. I was down in Asheville yesterday. Anybody been to Asheville, North Carolina? I don't think they have disasters there, okay? It's just so beautiful. A disaster is anything that disrupts the normal operations of a business. Another true story, I had a customer when I was running an IT practice out in San Diego, rough place, and they called me up and said, we've got a problem. This is back in 2000. I go into their office and walk into the server room, and there's water coming down the server rack. Now, I don't know how many of you aren't technical, but that's not a feature of a server rack. It never has been. Okay, you know, add a water fountain, that'd be kind of a cool thing. They do bright lights and stuff. But what had happened was there was a bathroom upstairs. And somebody already cringed because they realized it wasn't the sink that had overflowed all night. But the good news is they had backups. Where do you think these were? On top of the server where you're supposed to keep them, right?
Right next to the post-it that had the password.
With the password. Sure. I wasn't going to touch them. Now, there was no fire trucks, there was no news media coverage, but it was a disaster, obviously. Now, I don't know how many of you are on the clock right now. If we got anybody in here in sales? Okay, if I took your phones and destroyed them right now, it would probably be a disaster. It's going to disrupt the rest of your day. A disaster can be measured on many different levels at the individual level. Only 2 to 3% of disasters are actually natural disasters, and just start clicking until the very bottom images come up. Typically, disasters we're familiar with are what I call the oops factor. That would be hardware failure, human error, software errors, corruption, data theft. Those things are probably more familiar. You know, toilets draining through the ceiling of a business in North Park, San Diego is probably not the most common thing, but that's typically what we're going to face. I don't know if anybody here has been through a fire. I know that Joplin obviously went through a tornado. Sandy's been through something pretty amazing. Besides disasters disrupting access, there's something else that happens is we lose data. Now, I like this slide because depending on what business you're in or industry you're in, you can kind of segment yourself. And I don't know where the Aberdeen group drew their lines, but basically the most common, second most common, would be hardware failure when it comes to data loss. Now, data loss is something that has a significant impact. You've done your RPO study by now. You know what an RPO is. So if you have a hardware failure, what else are you going to lose besides data? Continuity, so you lose both. And these are just slides to be, you know, so you can learn from them. He'll make this deck available later, but any of you that have to take this information back and try to convince somebody else to make a decision, this might be helpful for you. When we look at the importance of continuity at a business level, businesses were surveyed and said, when you rate the priorities within your organization, where would you rate them? These all look pretty simple. If you're in business, if you've gone through an MBA course, you understand every one of these. Phone systems, copiers, new softwares, anything in the technology world can solve different points here. But what's missing from this list is improving business continuity. That was rated number 10. Anybody know who the Gartner Group is? You guys familiar with them? In the IT industry, they're kind of like the Gallup poll, except I trust the Gartner Group. They give you information about which way the wind's blowing within the information technology space. Number 10 should be number 1, because without it, you can't do any of those things. Well, you can, I guess, if you want to go back to paper. When we look at business continuity, we have tangibles and intangibles. But let's face it, are we a little more dependent on technology today than we were yesterday and the day before? What about tomorrow? Do you think we're going to be less dependent on technology in your business? Probably double dependent by next year, triple dependent, we don't know, but it's growing every day. You didn't think you would ever be so dependent on something like this, did you? I mean, people can't even drive down the road without looking at it, right? Look at the police officer back there. I've got an important email. I've got to get it now. I'm on the Ohio Turnpike. But it's growing. Keep going. Some of the non-quantifiable but definitely tangible impacts according to studies of lost business continuity are: business continuity affects your reputation. It'll affect your customer loyalty. It'll affect your staff morale. Everybody loves the term stupid computer. Anybody ever heard that one? Stupid computers. Why do we have to get a new software? The quantifiable impacts of lack of continuity, almost 52% that experienced unscheduled downtime in the last 12 months. 17% had it occur more than twice. 20% of small businesses will suffer a major disaster, loss of critical data. After a major disaster, 25% of an organization will lose, after an average company will lose 25% of its daily revenue in the first 6 days, and 40% if it lasts up to 24 hours. And here's the one I like. Don't like it, but it's a reality. It's a sobering fact. 93% of companies that lost their data for 10 or more days filed for bankruptcy. This is according to the Census Bureau. On record with the National Archive and Records Administration, 93% that lost their data filed for bankruptcy. It's important. So let's talk about the evolution of disaster recovery. Okay, Mark, you've scared us. We need to have our DR plan. We get it. Stop beating me with that stick. In the beginning, man created tape. So I like tape. I slept on a data center floor in San Diego when I had my .com, and we got hit by some. Anybody remember the Nimba virus? It came in through Internet Information Services and blew away our SQL database. So we did what you do with a tape. Back then, servers were a little bit simpler. You would reload the operating system, install the software, configure the permissions, install some more software, configure some more permissions, and then you would start laying your data back in. We did all that, got it up and working, and went to download the patch, and we forgot to turn IIS off, and we got hit again. But that was 14 hours of my life sleeping on a data center floor playing with tapes. Anybody here recovered from tape? David, you've been helpful. Give me a few words to describe the experience. A little short of horrifying. So we've gotten rid of tape. Although tape was, my 3 bullet points, it backed up your files in system state. It was a data level backup, kind of like transcribing. It was easy to carry around. You could put it in your pocket, throw it in your car, leave it in the sun, like you do. Forget it in your trunk. And it was relatively affordable. Fortunately, businesses became more dependent on technology, and a lot of them said, hey, we need this stuff to be up all the time. And we came out with something called high availability. Everybody knows what high availability is. That means you have 2. That's where it starts. At least 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. But your systems are never down. So when I did the RTO, RPO thing, you said 0 and 0. Now, if you did that, you would not say that for every one of your servers. If you did, you probably should be buying lunch somewhere else, much nicer. Because these solutions are, come on. Expensive and complex.
I'm sorry.
You're killing the dramatic effect.
I know. You need high availability mouse clicker.
That's true. There is an app for this. I'm not afraid to use it. So most businesses, most servers are protected by what we call the backup and disaster recovery model, meaning that they have to fail and recover because high availability is not practical or necessarily affordable for everyone. There was some pretty intelligent people that came up with something called image level backup or image-based backup. And the concept's really simple, just in case everybody doesn't understand it, but this is data level backup. I'm going to copy the letters A, B, C, D, et cetera. Actually, it's just doing 1s and 0s, but I'm going to copy every word for word, letter for letter, like a transcribe. Or I can take the surface of the disk, so to speak. Let's say you're the hard drive, and I'll just take a picture. Everybody say cheese. All right, and I would have it. Now I have exactly what that system looked like in an image. And if he moved, just get the changes. That's an image-based backup with an incremental change recorded right after it changed. That's the technology that became prevalent. The next thing that happened is we moved from tape to disk. I got them in backwards order. So we went from tape to disk. Why? Because disks became a little bit more affordable. These became, they couldn't store enough because our data outgrew them. So that combination and with image-based backup. Thing that followed that was the hardware redundancy. We used to keep 2 servers, 1 server to fail over to. That wasn't a failover. The backup recovery model, when your server failed, you went over to the other server and recovered from that other server. Server sprawl occurred. We started having 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 servers. There's no way you're going to have enough standby servers. Fortunately, virtualization came along. And then we went from carrying those things out in our purse, in our briefcase, in our glove boxes and trunks to offsite replication, leveraging the internet. That's where we're at now. The comparison, for those of you that are wondering what file level backup is compared to volume-based, volume is another term for image-based backup, is one's easy to use and it protects the data. But again, if your server has crashed and I gave you the data back from your server, what are you going to do with it? I mean, really? You're going to, hey, everybody, look, everybody access your data. Can you see it? I mean, your users obviously need a way to get to it. You need to stand up your entire operating system, all your permissions, all your services, everything about it. Image-based backup makes that happen. So here's a demonstration of image-based backup for those of you that are learning what backups are about. An image-based backup takes a photograph of everything on the hard drive or the volume. of that server or operating system. That includes Windows. That includes all the services, all the permissions, the SQL, Exchange, everything. Every attribute recorded, put into a single file, encapsulated, probably compressed and encrypted, and sent over to a target. This is the technology that Simplex-IT is leveraging. The ability to take and back up to, in this case, we've got a laptop that is actually being backed up right now to a device over there. It happens to be a Windows server. It could be an iSCSI target on the network. It could be a NAS, a SAN, a USB drive attached. But we've taken an image, a photograph, and saved it somewhere. And anytime something changes, we're going to take another photograph up to every 15 minutes, send it over to that same target. In the event that laptop crashes, we'll recover from that target. We'll show you what that looks like. Go ahead, next. So we'd be able to recover from any type of hardware, physical, virtual, HP, Dell, AMD, Intel, doesn't really matter. Hardware independent restore. No longer bound by, remember what used to happen when you'd have to recover an operating system? I know some of you have been through this. You go to recover the operating system to new hardware from a backup and you get the infamous what? Oh, we love the blue screen of death. That's basically the operating system. I don't know this hardware. It's like taking me over to a big copier printer machine and telling me to make a photocopy. I'll just look at it and go, I'm not touching this thing. The operating system would do the same thing. So we've got a method of being able to take it from whatever it was on to whatever we want to go to without having to go through the wonderful blue screen of death. So when we look at recovery solutions, quick recovery solutions, we look at the ability to back up. Here's your 4 pillars of a backup. Number one, you have to, going too fast. Number one, you have to be able to back up an accurate and reliable copy. Image-based backup or volume-based backup is absolutely the way to make that happen. Number two, once you create a backup and the subsequent incremental changes to that backup, you want to be able to manage those. Anybody here under compliance requirements? A few of you? Okay, meaning you have to keep a certain number of copies and have certain ways you handle that data. So you want to be able to run retention and consolidation policies and maybe replicate to another location. You don't want to have just runaway backup files at your storage location. So we've got to be able to manage them. Then we have to be able to test. Why don't most companies test their backup recovery? They can't. So if we had a way to test it, if I had a way to blow away a server and recreate it, or at least recreate it before I blew it away, I would feel a lot more confident that I had the ability to recover should the actual disaster occur. Oscar, how many drills do you go through for disasters? Planned scenarios in your community? So you do have them though, right? So if X happens, you know what you're going to do, where you're supposed to go. It's rehearsed. Okay. And somebody gets paid to sit around and think about every possible scenario, right? I don't know if that's you. I don't know how big your department is, but the point is you've got to be able to test. You've got to be able to simulate. If you can do those three, the fourth one's kind of a gimme. You've got to be able to recover, knowing absolutely positively that you can recover your services. Next. You're always going to run into licensing scenarios. It's become a lot easier now compared to what it was in the past when you had an OEM license trying to put it on a different machine, having to deal with activation issues. And Microsoft and organizations like that have become a lot more tolerant in those scenarios. Obviously, for continued use, you're going to have to deal with appropriate license or get your licenses. So, good question, though.
Yeah, usually from a licensing standpoint, we'll talk specifically about Microsoft. You've got two kind of flavors of licensing. There's the OEM licensing. It came with the box. Well, if the box dies and goes away, the license goes with it. Now, usually Microsoft has some tolerance built in so that if you have to temporarily run that license on a virtual recovery server while the original server is being repaired, and then you replace that license back, that's not a problem. But if you are looking to have either a flexible environment where you can actually migrate servers temporarily or fully to the new, whether it be virtual or new hardware, absolutely 100% best bet is to go with the Microsoft licensing, whether it be an open value, open license, or anything along those lines. And actually, with the Server 2012 license, actually is a lot more tolerant of virtualization than earlier Microsoft standard licensing. So, yeah, it's a good question.
So here's a scenario for you. I don't know about you guys. I'm a visual learner. These bullet points and graphs will put me to sleep. So we're not going to get too technical. We're going to bring it back up here. You have your typical network environment. You've got a couple of servers, physical, virtual, whatever, and you've got some desktops. In this scenario, you're going to put in a backup device, something you're going to back up to. Is it a USB attached drive? Is it a A full-on server, is it network-attached storage? Doesn't really matter. You've got a destination to back up to. In this case, we've also got shadow protect, and I'm trying not to make this a product pitch, but this is a demonstration on our technology and how it solves it. If you've got questions about how the competitors out there work, they're very similar in some ways, and we've got differentiators. That's another conversation. So we're backing up. We've got an agent running in each one of those workstations and servers that's watching the hard drive. It's already taken a photograph, and every time something changes, it sees what changes, and up to every 15 minutes, it's going to take a photograph of those changes. It's going to grab the active change sectors, create a file, compress, encrypt it, and send it over to the target, and create a backup file and a chain of changes that go along with it. Next. Also, because we are wise, we're going to replicate our data to a second location. That could be another BDR at your second site. It could be at his data center. It could be, you pick the place. The main point is to get it geographically separate from your original data in case if something happens. Now in this case, something happens. Server number 2 goes up in smoke, or maybe down in water, toilet floods. I don't know what the case is. But you call Bob and you say, Bob, what do we do? Well, is everybody okay? Yeah, drag the thing out in the lobby and soak it in water again. In the meantime, he's going to remote into your remote storage, or your local storage, local BDR. He's going to go through a process that you'll see here, and he's going to virtualize the server that failed from the backup files. Literally take the backup files and present them to a hypervisor and say, hey, here's your server again. Double check a couple of things, make sure the Windows activation is not a problem. Would be a good example. And go ahead and give the users access to that server. While your users are running off the recovered server, which is just a virtual instance running on a temporary BDR, you're going to bring in new hardware. The new hardware, you're going to recover to that new hardware from the same backup chain that's on that server. And in fact, that backup chain is being appended to by the recovery server. You're not losing any backups. You're actually adding to it because it's the same server. So independently and concurrently, you're going to recover from the backup chain back to that server, the new server you've just purchased, while this recovery server is running. And at the appropriate time, you're going to take a quick backup, shut down the recovery server, pull the last few changes over, and have that server back up. Total downtime in a scenario like this, if it took you a half an hour, I'd be surprised. So I don't know what your recovery time objective was, but we're probably talking about 5 minutes each if you've rehearsed it and you know what your limitations are and you've gone through the scenario, you've practiced it. But the good news is you can do that. The next scenario is not a good one, but it is a reality. If you've got a multi-office business, if you're a municipality and there's people dependent on your uptime, you need to be able to get access to your data and services quickly. And not, a lot of companies, if you said, hey, I've got a smoking crater where my office used to be, you're probably not so worried about getting your services back up right away. You're probably worried about other things. But if you're one of those other categories and you need high availability or quick availability, in this case, you've got your data replicated somewhere else. And those backup files can quickly be mounted and virtualized according to whatever your recovery plan is. Now, obviously, you're looking for, if you've got users, a place for them to sit, desktops. You should have all this planned out. Are they going to get there through VPN? Are they going to have an application server that they're accessing, et cetera? You'll go through that scenario. But this is a modern-day business continuity plan using disaster recovery or backup and recovery model versus high availability. The old process of having to reinstall an operating system, reinstall the updates, and go back from a data level backup, it's gone. If you're using that, you're crazy, unless you just really don't have a recovery time objective. And I would challenge you to practice it. Just try it once. Go buy a second server or hire one of those companies to audit you and let them test it.
Let me bring up one quick thing on, in this scenario here, where we're replacing the server, one of the other issues that happened with a lot of the older technologies was the need for this new server to be identical or close to it to this particular server. Okay? In this environment, what we're talking about, totally unnecessary. All right? Because you could have a server that is, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. It's running a server 2003, all that kind of fun stuff. And especially if we're running from a tape environment. You've got to have a tape drive that this thing actually fits into.
And the drivers to run it.
And the drivers to run it. And the software and the licensing and all that. And if this is a situation where this hardware is gone, good luck finding it.
Not going to get it. eBay.
Yeah, eBay, with all its reliability as far as all of the vendors out there, And they're going to accept your definition of an emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with this situation, it is go buy the latest and greatest. Go buy an appropriate replacement server based on your current needs and do the hardware independent restore, the bare metal restore.
And to point out, none of this hardware has a logo on it.
Yeah.
We're not talking, they got Barracuda in the airport here advertised, I assume, Sonic Wall CDP. They use similar technologies as to what we do. They put it in a proprietary package, so you're going to have their stuff to get your stuff back. We're talking about an open architecture here. Right now, the limitation is Windows, and I say right now, but we're talking about an architecture where you can go to any type of hardware from any type of hardware using multiple types of hypervisors. It's up to you. Go ahead. And I think we're ready for our live demo. So I asked you earlier, what if? What if I could recover your data quickly or recover your servers quickly? Would you feel a little bit more confident about the scenario of let me destroy what you have? Obviously, we're not going to this Friday. Let's not. I've got to be back in Charlotte. But we're going to ask him. Let me describe the architecture he has. He's got a virtual machine running on this laptop. It might as well be the laptop. But he's got an operating system running on this laptop that is actually running Shadow Protect to back up to a target server, which is, we call it a BDR. I should have clarified that's a backup disaster recovery appliance, unit, server, whatever you want to call it. So he's got a BDR down there, and he's just doing backups, and it's automatically backing up every 15 minutes. So Danny has some important files. Danny, being the astute student he has taken an intern job with one of you all. Probably David. Looks like David's got an organization back there hiring an intern. And let's go ahead and create Danny's important files. And so he's preparing your annual report for you. Put a lot of research and time into it, and he's called it Danny's Important Files. Sense of humor and a keyboard. And go ahead and fire off an incremental while we're sitting here. And the good news is you've had the backups running in the background, and that's as much of the product as we're going to show you because we just need to fire off the incremental. This isn't a product demonstration. This is a functionality demonstration. That should take just a couple of seconds, and we're backing up to a target server. As you see, we're going off to a network-attached share. We just fired off and created incremental number 2, Shadow Protect incremental number 2 for base image number 1. Oh, wow, it's done. Okay, well, that was our every 15-minute backup. Not a lot changed on that drive, so we didn't really need to run a very big backup. Makes it a lot easier to replicate that data, obviously. So go ahead and you can shut this down, and in fact, you can just go ahead and shut that server down. Kill the power to it.
Great.
So let's go over to the server. So Danny, our end user, has gone ahead and deleted some files, and he calls you, David, and says, David, I think sometime recently I deleted those files I was working on. Can you get them back for me, David? You're running tape. What's the first question you ask him?
Back it up.
How important were they? Well, they were your annual report files. Okay, when's the last time you saw them, Danny? I don't know, Thursday last week. So the next question you got to do is, what do you got to do next?
Do you value your job?
Yeah, he's just a user. He doesn't know anything about backup. So David's got to go find the tape. Where's the tape, David? Last Thursday. I don't know. It's probably in this pile over here on the server, or in my trunk, or in my glove box. Hopefully not. How long does it typically take to recover a file from tape? Anybody that's done that? At least a half an hour, and that's just finding the tape. So go ahead and, if you go to the backup files, so he's on the actual backup server now because we've declared a disaster. Maybe this is just a file. There's the files that were being saved to that server. We have a full image, which is the entire operating system, services, everything else. It's the large photograph. And then we've recorded some incremental changes that have occurred. Now, I'm not going to let him go into any fancy software. Just right-click on number 2, do a quick mount. And how many drives does this thing have? 3? Nope. Okay, now it has 4. We just added another one. Go ahead and, I'm sorry, I went too fast for us. Go back. Go ahead and dismount it. Let me ask that again. How many drives does this server have? It has a C drive and an X drive, and we don't count the CD-ROM. So Windows sees 2 volumes on that server, right? Is that clear to everybody? A C drive and an X drive. Now right-click on the latest and greatest backup. What we're doing is we're going to go ahead and take those files, sort of like we're not actually putting them together. We're telling Windows that that's a single file. It's a volume, and we've just mounted it as the next drive letter, D. As a network administrator, you just took an entire backup of a machine that's on another server and presented it to Windows and said, here's a volume. It happens to be read-only. Go find his files. Okay, go ahead and drag those over to the desktop, would you? Or the user's folder. Okay, Danny, please don't delete anything again. There's your files back. That took me like 4 hours. Or how long did it take? 15 seconds. Now, of course, you would have run encryption on this, and it would have taken longer to remember the password, which is my usual problem, than it does to recover the files. That is how long it takes to do file level recovery with image space backup. And you've got up to every 15 minutes. So we talked about recovery point objectives. Now, your recovery point objective is 15 minutes, depending on how far back you're keeping the files. The next thing we're going to do is go back to that last file, to the backup files. Yeah, I'm sorry, you can dismount that. We're done with that. We can dismount it. Just out of curiosity, if you had mounted a drive from an end user, from an end user's computer or from a server, what else could you do with that temporary mounted drive? Network administrators, what might you want to do with that drive that you don't want to do on your production server? Check disk? When was the last time everybody's run check disk? We all get up and do that every day, right? You don't think there's corrupt sectors on your disks? Hopefully you've got some software that's telling you what's going on and you're running on a regular basis. If you're also backing up the unused space, you could run a forensic check. See what shouldn't be there. All sorts of things you can do. Go ahead and go to the backup files. So here's some really fun stuff. Not only has Danny deleted the files, he's also kicked the server over, and it's going click, 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 click. Anybody heard that sound before? That's the sound of this little arm right here reading the drive, slamming up against the side of the spindle constantly. It's not a good thing, okay? You're going to spend thousands of dollars if you don't have a reliable backup. So, Danny, thanks a lot. That server's pretty much toast anyway. Some of the capacitors blew out when that happened. Right-click on it, virtual boot. Now, what we're going to do is it's going to show us the volume that needs to be mounted. If this had been an Exchange server or a SQL server, it would also show us any other dependent volumes because you probably want to mount those at the same time. Wouldn't do any good to bring an Exchange server without the Exchange database. Next. Give it some funky name up there at the top. Has that name been used yet?
It's fine.
Okay. So all we're going to do is give the virtual machine a name for the virtual machine's purpose. We're not actually creating a new server name. Next. And some memory. Finish. And I'll explain what's happening. If you're not technical, bear with me. So we have a full backup, and we have some incremental files stored somewhere. Instead of pulling all those together and recreating a new drive, all we're going to do is tell the hypervisor, in this case, it was VirtualBox by Oracle. We're going to tell the hypervisor that, hey, here's your VDMK, or virtual hard drive. I need you to use these files, or this file, because we're lying to it and telling it it's just a single file. I need you to use this to boot from. And before you do that, so you don't throw up on us, we need to mount you and then go in and grab the drivers for the hardware in the System32 folder, rip them out and replace them with the correct drivers. That's our hardware independent restore you saw running. Go ahead and start it. So what we just did was we made sure that it could go from whatever type of machine he has there over to a different hypervisor and not do that blue screen. We've done a hardware independent restore. So we have not actually copied any data. We've not moved any data. We've not recovered a server. We have just virtualized from a backup chain. Now the machine, if the machine that was creating this backup chain was still in production, it would still be adding incrementals. We're not disrupting anything. All we're doing is testing right now to verify that we can recover. I would say we can recover. What would you say? We've gotten this far. If you get past the little thing flying across the bottom, you've already loaded the drivers. The point is you've just proven that you could absolutely positively recover this server in a virtual environment. And how long did that take? Yeah, it would have taken me longer to remember the password. for the encrypted files. And you've done it without having to move anything. He could have done this from his laptop and had the VHD over there, except he's actually remoted on there. You could do this across your local network to network-attached storage. You could do it in a number of fashions. But you can absolutely positively test the recoverability of your servers in this type of model.
Now think about this from a situational standpoint. In a lot of cases, you're in a scenario where suddenly the server is not working. Well, what do you need to do? You need to triage it. You need to try to decide, do some high-level, mid-level testing to decide whether or not it's serious, whether it's going to be, let's call Dell, let's call HP, have a service call done, then we're going to be dependent upon all that time. Now, all the time, in the case of a server outage, the server's down. There's no productivity. Users aren't able to do that. With this, we can, once we establish that the server is off the network, we can bring up this environment with that latest data this quickly. And so far, we haven't had to go on site. We can do this remotely. Okay? So between the time of discovery of the issue, discovery of the failure, to we've got a solution in place, the time is low, significantly.
So going back to our original questions, what is your recovery time objective? What is your recovery point objective? Are you certain that you have the ability to meet those objectives? And when is the last time you've tested it? If you can't test it, you're not using the latest in backup and disaster recovery technology. Doesn't mean it's expensive, by the way. It just means things have changed. Technology is changing, dependency on it is changing, and so have the tools. And this, I hope, was a good demonstration of that. I've got 2 thank yous for great questions. If you could take one of these, Danny, and hand it back. I didn't see the name. Yeah, great question. And Danny being a student, of course, he's got to play with it. Some desktop edition there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cool. Let's hear it.
Thank you.